Yeah, pretty much since the beginning of video games, people have worried about gaming's effect on players. And now, in an era of spectacle murders, one of the typical talking head excuses for shootings like Aurora or Sandy Hook is violent video games. They carted them out just last month in response to the El Paso and Dayton shootings.
The glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace.
But the idea of these video games to dehumanize individuals, to have a game of shooting individuals and others.
So I thought, for what it's worth, let's talk about where people might get this ridiculous idea. And is that Super Smash Brothers? That's what you picked to depict violent video games? Kirby is fucking vicious, man. Video games have been criticized for a long time, even as far back as Atari, which, Jesus Christ, I can barely tell what's even happening on the screen, let alone be influenced by it. The game that finally really pushed the United States government over the edge is a cheesy sitcom masquerading as a game, Night Trap. Released on an expensive and poor-selling add-on to the Sega Genesis, Night Trap featured live-action video telling a dumb story and an equally dumb gameplay mechanic. But a bunch of old senators saw this.
What are you doing?
And thought, it's corrupting the youth, so let's hold a hearing.
About 2 months ago, I saw the video game Night Trap for the first time. It is a sick, disgusting video game, in my judgment. It's an effort to trap and kill women. Shame on people that produce that trash. It's child abuse, in my judgment.
Basically, Congress thought the game encouraged violence against women, and everyone was like... Night Trap involves you, the player, toggling between various screens to activate traps to capture these vampire things called augurs in order to save these girls at a sleepover. So the game wasn't exactly advocating violence against ladies in sleepwear, but encouraging its prevention? That didn't really register for Congress, who were too old, I guess, to play a game, or maybe read up on it before having a hearing, or whatever, I guess. Why do we keep letting old people run our country? Every hearing ever on stuff that deals with technology doesn't go well.
If I choose to terminate my Facebook account, can I bar Facebook or any third parties from using the data that I had previously supplied for any purpose whatsoever?
Yes, Senator. If you delete your account, we should get rid of all of your information.
Anyway, these 1993 hearings over Night Trap led to the creation of the ESRB, or as you know it, this little white box in the corner of the cover that said whether or not Mom would buy this game for me. The TLWBITCOTCTS Worm WBTGFM rating system really owes its existence to two games, the previously discussed Night Trap and... whose bloody-ass fatalities shocked parents and enthralled children across the country. But I've never seen any spine rippers on the news. I'm really well aware that I'm being a little facetious, but my point is that the ESRB is a great thing. It was created because there was definitely some stuff 10-year-old Jake didn't need to see, and this little thing told my parents, who really knew nothing about video games, what was and wasn't appropriate. It's unfortunate that it came about because congressmen couldn't do some research. But I'm happy to tell you Congress has gotten much better at doing their research now.
You couldn't do this in China, right? Or what you did in 10 years.
Well, Senator, there are some very strong Chinese internet companies.
Right, but you're supposed to answer yes to this question.
We're all gonna die. The problem is these hearings set the standard for people in positions of power running off half-cocked about video game violence. This false connection between real-world violence and video games hit a fever pitch in 1999 following the Columbine tragedy. In the wake of something so unprecedented at the time, but sadly something that has become kind of common now, it was discovered that one of the boys, Eric Harris, loved ID Software's game, Doom. Doom was the first truly successful and popular first-person shooter involving the player, Doom Guy, killing demons from hell. Pretty simple, very fun. Then, in 2001, this game appeared. With its sandbox-style open-world gameplay, Grand Theft Auto 3 changed the rules about what a game could feel like. For once, you, the gamer, felt pretty much allowed to do whatever you wanted. Which was the problem. Jess, it's your car! Being allowed and basically encouraged to kill innocent bystanders made people unhappy, especially in the wake of 9/11.
Announced by Congress here in the U.S., the game has been outlawed in Australia, and several other countries are also considering bans. Despite, or perhaps because of such complaints, Grand Theft Auto 3 is the nation's top-selling video game this year.
Also in 2001, the fucking Surgeon General of the fucking United States, David Satcher, led a study on the correlation between youth violence and violent video games and found video games have, quote, a relatively small impact on violence. Instead, Satcher and his team found risk factors of mental stability and quality of home life to have a more significant correlation with violence, which basically aligns with every other major study done on the subject. Over the next few years, more studies found the same conclusions. In 2004, in 2005, and in 2008. Despite this, crusty Congress people continue to state otherwise.
And I see a video game industry that teaches young people to kill.
But before we continue, I want to address one of those risk factors Satcher found: mental illness. While most mass shooters do struggle with mental illness, most people with mental illness don't commit violent crimes. Think of it this way: most mass shooters have mental illness, but most people with mental illness don't commit mass shootings. This is another myth regarding mass shootings, that it's a mental health crisis.
This is also a mental illness problem. If you look at both of these cases, this is mental illness.
I mean, we do have a mental health crisis in America, but addressing that problem won't make much of a dent in the amount of mass shootings we have. But fine. If you want to insist that that's the problem and help our mental illness crisis in America, please, by all means, go ahead. Oh, wait, that's right. Look, this isn't to say video games are completely harmless. While they don't encourage violent behavior, numerous studies suggest the way female characters are sexualized or the lack of representation of characters of color does have an effect on players. In fact, a 2009 study found in a sample of 150 video games picked from 9 different platforms, only 10.74% of characters were African American, but almost all of them were either athletes or gangsters. The issue here is the danger of reinforcing stereotypes for white and black gamers. In 2012, a study from Indiana University assessed the long-term effects of television exposure on 400 black and white boys and girls. The only group that didn't experience a loss of self-esteem over time was white boys. I can't think of one game that allows the player to design their own character that the default design is non-white. So, no, video games are not harmless. But in a world of guns, video games don't matter all that much, but race still does. Probably against popular belief, the biggest demographic that dies from gun violence is actually white males, from self-inflicted violence.
Tell me, you after something to use on yourself or others?
Guns claim nearly 24,000 American lives via suicide each year. 70% of all suicides in our country, regardless of the means by which it is done, are white men. And thus, when we discuss legislation that would address gun violence and gun control, this is actually a type of violence we have to consider as well. We also need to talk about how black Americans are left out of the conversation regarding responsible legal gun ownership. Because I do want to say that as much as I personally have no interest in guns, I grew up in rural Indiana around plenty of people who do own guns. In 2008, the Supreme Court confirmed the Second Amendment protects the, quote, individual right to possess and carry weapons in case of confrontation. Is that what the Founding Fathers intended? Who the fuck cares what they thought? Those fuckers thought black people only counted as 3/5 of a person. The Constitution is a living, breathing document, and I am okay with the Supreme Court's decision. What I am not okay with is the fact that legal gun ownership still resulted in the death of Philando Castile in 2016. Gun control is not a black and white issue, but it is first and foremost about black and white people. So we need to move past ridiculous claims about violent video games and other media and into the real world where we hash out questions like, what kind of guns should citizens reasonably be allowed to own? Handguns? Fine. Hunting rifles? Whatever. But why the fuck was this kid able to order an AK-47 from overseas? We also need to consider who is allowed to own a gun. Why was Dylan Roof, the South Carolina church shooter, able to buy a .45 caliber Glock handgun months after an arrest on a felony drug charge? Oh, it was because B, we don't require background checks on private gun transactions, and C, why is Philando Castile dead if it's legal to own a firearm? There are some glimmers of hope. In April this year, Congress renewed the Violence Against Women Act with a new provision closing the boyfriend loophole, which helps prevent the sale of firearms to domestic abusers. Our current administration issued a federal ban on bump stocks, which began in March. In July, an NPR PBS Marist poll found 89% of voters across both parties are in favor of universal background checks. That alone shows the American people are much more united on this issue than weird shit like this movie and this weird group of people wants us to believe. But there are still worrisome signs. Just hours after the El Paso shooting, laws allowing guns on school grounds and in places of worship went into effect in Texas. And in the wake of horrible shootings, our president expresses interest in gun legislation.
But we have to have meaningful background checks.
But then walks it back a few days later when the NRA comes knocking.
For the most part, as strong as you make your background checks, they would not have stopped any of it.
A cycle Mitch McConnell is all too willing to exploit.
I said several weeks ago that if the president took a position on a bill so that we knew we would actually be making a law and not just having serial votes, I'd be happy to put it on the floor.
I guess the TL didn't watch here is, 1, monitor what your kids are playing. I'm finally playing the God of War trilogy for the first time, and it was probably for the best my mom didn't let me do this when I was 11. 2, stop blaming video games, you fucking cowards. And also, learn how to do your own goddamn research. 3, finally, regardless of your political affiliation, I know most of you watching this out there want your fellow citizens to be safe and support stronger gun control. If we all chill out and realize that there will never be a countrywide ban on firearms, whether you'd be for it or against it, we can actually make some bipartisan compromises that keeps guns out of the hands of people who can hurt themselves or others. We'll see you next week. Hey, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us what you thought about it. Tell us what you'd like to see, because we'd love to make videos that are about topics you want to watch. That would be a really nice relationship to have here. Also, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. We have a lot of cute pets, and you can look at them. And also, occasionally, I think I'm kind of funny on Twitter. Bye! I don't know why I ever asked you to be player number 2.